What if one email shattered everything you thought was real? A pregnant wife discovers her millionaire husband's secret getaway with another woman. What follows is a storm of lies, betrayal, and one woman's fight to protect her future. Will she stay silent or rise from the ashes? You won't believe how this ends. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, emotional stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. Linda Palmer had never imagined betrayal could be so quiet, so subtle. It didn't come in the form of lipstick on a collar or a whispered name in sleep. It arrived as a click, a soft, casual click of the mouse, as she sat at the kitchen counter one gray Thursday morning, checking her email while sipping ginger tea to calm her pregnancy nausea. Edward's laptop had been left open, as usual. He always left it there when he traveled. Too much security hassle at the airport, he often said with a charming smile. He'd flown out 2 nights ago, supposedly to San Diego for a business summit. Linda hadn't thought much of it, until she saw it. A browser tab flickered as the system refreshed. A new email popped up with a subject line that made her heart stutter. Santorini Dream Escape. Your romantic itinerary is confirmed. She froze. Edward wasn't the romantic vacation type, at least not lately. Not since her pregnancy had made her too tired for weekend getaways and wine tastings. Curiosity gave way to a slow dread as she clicked the email open. 2 names on the booking: Edward Palmer and Clara Wynne. Clara, who? Linda had never heard that name before. Not in business meetings, not in their circle of friends, not once in 3 years of marriage. Her breath caught as she scrolled further. A luxury villa overlooking the caldera, a candlelit dinner reservation at a cliffside restaurant, a couple's massage package, champagne on arrival, sunset cruise for 2. Her hand gripped the edge of the kitchen island, knuckles white. The kettle clicked off behind her, steam rising unnoticed. This wasn't business. This wasn't an innocent misunderstanding. This was intimacy. Planned, paid for, hidden, and the worst part, it was beautiful. Everything Linda had dreamed of during the early days of their marriage, before morning sickness and swollen ankles, before Edward's distance grew with each passing month. She reread the email, trying to find her name somewhere, anywhere. But no, it was all Clara Wynne. Clara Wynne was the woman taking her place. Her eyes burned as she closed the laptop, but she didn't cry. Not yet. The baby kicked, just once, as if reminding her that she wasn't alone. She whispered, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator, "I need to know what kind of father he's going to be." 10 minutes later, she was walking through light rain toward the subway, umbrella forgotten at the door. Her mind replayed every business trip, every moment Edward had glanced at his phone and gone silent. She had always trusted him. She wanted to believe he was just busy, that he was building their future. But now she wondered if she had been building a life for 3, when Edward only ever planned for 2. By the time she reached Diane's loft, she was shaking. Her best friend opened the door in pajama pants and eyeliner from the night before, the smell of cinnamon coffee filling the air. "Linda?" Diane said, her voice softening as soon as she saw her face. Linda couldn't speak. She simply handed her the laptop she'd brought and pointed at the screen. Diane read in silence, her jaw tightening with every line. When she finished, she looked up with a fire in her eyes that Linda hadn't seen in months. "You're not crazy," she said, "and this isn't okay." "I don't know what to do," Linda whispered. Her voice cracked. "I don't want to overreact, but if it's true, it's not just suspicious," Diane said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "It's deliberate. This isn't a mistake, Linda. It's a secret. He's hiding something, and you need to find out what." Linda nodded slowly. Her throat felt dry. Her heart, somehow both broken and burning, gave her the answer she needed. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want to scream or throw plates. She just wanted the truth, cold and clear. And if Edward was hiding it, she was ready to tear the silence apart. The morning after discovering the itinerary, Linda sat at Diane's kitchen table in silence, tracing the rim of her teacup with her finger. The world outside the loft's fogged-up windows moved on like nothing had happened. Cars honked, a neighbor's dog barked, and sunlight streamed in lazily through the blinds. But inside her, a storm was building. She hadn't slept, not really. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Edward's name next to Clara Wynne's on that damn reservation, framed by images of whitewashed villas and deep blue waters. Diane shuffled into the kitchen holding her phone, hair tied in a messy knot, eyes sharp despite the early hour. "I've been thinking," she said. "You need proof. Hard proof. Not just emails and pretty reservations. You need something undeniable." Linda looked up, exhausted but focused. "I already have the emails. That should be enough." Diane raised an eyebrow. "For your heart, maybe. But not if he spins it, not if you confront him, and he gaslights you into thinking you're overreacting. You need someone who can dig deeper." Quietly. Linda hesitated. "Like a private investigator?" Diane nodded. "I know a guy, Samuel Quinn. He used to be a reporter, one of those investigative types who dug into corruption before he went private. He's low profile, discreet, and very, very good." It sounded dramatic, like something out of a movie. But then again, so did her life now. Linda agreed, and within an hour, they were sitting in a quiet corner booth at a diner in Midtown, where the walls were lined with framed photos of jazz legends, and the air smelled like bacon and old coffee. Samuel Quinn looked exactly like someone who'd seen too much. Late 60s, lean, with silver hair cropped short and a faded leather notebook that he set gently on the table like it carried secrets from another time. He listened as Linda recounted everything: Edward's sudden business trips, his frequent texts at odd hours, his growing emotional distance since the pregnancy, and finally, the email, the itinerary. He didn't interrupt. He didn't give her a look of pity either. When she was done, he just nodded slowly. "I'll need a few days," he said. "I'll start with travel records, hotel logs, social media trails. If Clara Wynne is more than just a name on a reservation, I'll find out." Something in his tone, matter-of-fact and steady, calmed Linda more than any hug or kind word had since yesterday. Later that night, Edward called. "Hey, baby," his voice came through her phone like a crack in a quiet room. "How's everything?" Linda swallowed hard. "Fine," she said. "I went to Diane's, needed some girl time." He chuckled. "Good, you deserve it. I've got some crazy meetings lined up, but I'm thinking maybe next month, just you and me, a little baby moon, you pick the place." She stared at the ceiling. The gall. The performance. "That sounds nice," she managed, gripping the phone tightly. "We'll make it special," he said. "You've been amazing through this pregnancy. I want to spoil you." Linda murmured something in response, then hung up after the usual, "I love you." She sat in the dim bedroom Diane had prepared for her and let the silence stretch. He was lying to her. Lying so smoothly, it chilled her. And if she hadn't seen that email, if that tab hadn't refreshed, she stood and walked over to the mirror. Her face was pale, lips dry, but her eyes, they were sharper than they'd ever been. She wouldn't be fooled again. Not by roses or baby moon offers, or charming apologies. The next day, Samuel texted, tracking patterns. Santorini trip wasn't the first, updates soon. Her heart lurched. She had suspected as much, but seeing it confirmed, he'd done this before. Multiple trips, multiple lies. She thought back to a moment months ago when Edward had canceled their dinner plans at the last minute. Something about a delayed investor meeting. She remembered being hurt, but understanding. She'd ordered Thai food and fallen asleep watching a documentary on motherhood. Now she wondered if Clara had been across the table from him that night, sipping wine while he spun another tale. Linda scrolled through her camera roll, pausing on a photo of Edward's hand on her belly at their last doctor's appointment. He'd looked so proud, so present. But now every smile, every gesture seemed tainted, manufactured. She tried to remind herself it might still be a misunderstanding, that Clara could be a colleague, that maybe the suite was the only one available. But deep in her gut, something told her the truth would be uglier than any excuse he could offer. She closed her eyes and whispered to the child inside her, "I'm going to protect us, no matter what it takes." And this time, she meant it. 2 days later, Linda sat alone in a quiet corner of the coastal cafe Samuel had chosen for their follow-up meeting. Rain pattered softly against the windows, and her chamomile tea had gone cold. She wasn't sure if it was the anxiety twisting in her chest or the weight of knowing that this moment, whatever Samuel revealed, could tilt her world permanently off its axis. Her hand rested protectively over her swollen belly, fingers gently tapping a nervous rhythm. Samuel arrived exactly on time, trench coat damp from the rain, a worn leather folder tucked beneath one arm. He slid into the booth across from her without ceremony, his expression neutral but grave. "Linda," he greeted softly, "are you ready?" No, she wasn't. Not really. But she nodded anyway. Samuel opened the folder, revealing a stack of printed photographs, flight records, credit card transactions, and screenshots. He slid one photograph toward her first, Edward, stepping off a private jet in Paris, wearing sunglasses and a tailored overcoat, smiling at someone just out of frame. The next image answered the unspoken question. Edward and Clara Wynne, walking side by side down the tarmac, her arm casually hooked through his. Linda's breath caught. Her throat tightened. The air in the cafe seemed suddenly too thick to breathe. "There's more," Samuel said gently, pushing forward another set of photographs. In one, Edward and Clara dined on the rooftop of a five-star hotel in London, their heads close together over candlelight. In another, they stood on the balcony of a resort in Santorini, the resort from the email, both clad in white robes, sipping champagne, the sea stretched endlessly behind them. Samuel pointed at the timestamps. "That was 2 weeks ago. He told you he was in Chicago, right?" Linda couldn't speak. She pressed a hand to her lips, her eyes blurring. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't just suspicion and digital footprints. It was faces. His face, smiling, relaxed, loving, just not with her. Samuel continued, his voice low but steady. "The name Clara Wynne doesn't appear on any business record connected to Edward. She's not employed by any of his companies. She doesn't have holdings in any joint ventures. In fact," he flipped to a document at the back of the folder. "She received a direct wire transfer from one of Edward's personal accounts 2 months ago. $50,000. No memo." Linda's heart dropped like an anchor. "So he's financing her?" she whispered. "It would seem so. At the very least, he's maintaining her lifestyle. She rents an apartment in Monaco, drives a car registered to a shell company tied to one of Edward's offshore trusts." Linda's world narrowed to a sharp, unbearable point. Everything she thought she knew, every carefully arranged piece of their life, was slipping like sand through her fingers. Her voice was thin and shaky. "Has he been doing this since I got pregnant?" Samuel gave her a long, sympathetic look. The first flight log with both of them on it was from 5 months ago. Dubai, then London, then Monaco. Santorini was just the latest. 5 months. That was nearly the same week she'd shared the news with Edward that they were expecting. She remembered how his eyes had widened in disbelief, and how he'd scooped her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. Had he already been seeing Clara then? Or had the pregnancy driven him to it? "I don't have photos of them being intimate," Samuel added gently. "But the pattern is clear. It's not a one-time lapse. This has been going on for a while." Linda nodded slowly, the numbness creeping in. It was almost preferable to the stabbing ache in her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "I needed to know. I need the truth." Samuel leaned forward, placing a steady hand on the folder. "I know it's painful, but knowledge is power, Linda. You now hold every card." She stared down at the photos, the receipts, the neat rows of damning evidence. Part of her still wanted to believe there was a mistake. That Edward had explanations ready. That maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as it seemed. But the images in front of her left little room for interpretation. Later that night, she returned to Diane's loft and spread the folder open on the coffee table. Diane sat across from her, jaw clenched in fury as she flipped through the photos. "That bastard," she hissed. "He deserves nothing from you. Not your tears, not your patience, and definitely not your silence." Linda stared blankly at the photo of Edward and Clara in Santorini. His hand was on Clara's back, his head tilted affectionately toward hers. It wasn't just lust. It wasn't just sex. It looked like love, a love that had no room for a wife or a baby. "I'm going to confront him," Linda said, her voice steel beneath the sadness. "But not yet. Not until I'm ready." Diane looked at her and saw something in her friend's eyes she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not fear, resolve. 3 days passed before Linda felt ready. Not ready in the way one prepares for a dinner party or a doctor's visit, but the kind of readiness born from storm-weathered strength. She had rehearsed every word in her mind, every possible reaction Edward might throw her way. Rage. Denial. The charming smile he always wore when he thought he could talk his way out of anything. But this time, she wasn't coming unarmed. She had the folder, the photographs, the truth. And more importantly, she had nothing left to lose. Edward returned late that evening, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and airport coffee, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder like a man returning from war. He stepped into the apartment with a tired smile, loosening his tie. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, stepping toward her with casual affection. "You're up late." Linda sat calmly on the couch, one leg crossed over the other, the folder resting in her lap like a silent weapon. "We need to talk." Edward paused mid-step. "Everything okay?" He sounded cautious, like a man sensing a trap, but not quite sure where it lay. She didn't answer right away. She studied him instead. His calm demeanor, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the subtle check he did over her posture and tone, like he was already assessing how much damage control would be needed. He had no idea how far things had unraveled. "I know about Clara," she said finally, her voice low and even. "I know about Santorini, about Paris, about Dubai. I know everything, Edward." His smile dropped like glass shattering on tile. For a second, his face was blank, just a flicker of raw fear, then quickly rearranged into concern. "Linda, wait, I can explain." She opened the folder slowly, almost ceremonially, and slid one of the photos across the coffee table. The image of him and Clara, wrapped in white robes on a sun-drenched balcony, landed between them. "Don't," she said. "Don't insult me with lies." He stared at the photo, his lips parting slightly, like he'd forgotten it had ever been taken. "It's not what you think," he said, reaching forward as though to close the folder. Linda pulled it back before he could. "She's not a business partner. She's not part of some estate deal in Europe. You wired her money. You stayed in romantic suites. You held her hand in public like I didn't exist." His shoulders sank, the tension in his jaw giving way to a tired sigh. "I made a mistake." Linda's eyebrows arched. "A mistake? A year-long affair is not a mistake, Edward. It's a campaign." He ran a hand through his hair and sat down across from her, no longer pretending. "I was overwhelmed. You got pregnant so fast, and I didn't know how to handle it. Everything was changing." "You mean I was changing?" she said, a bitter note slipping through. "You missed the excitement, the freedom." "I never stopped loving you," he said quickly, as if those words could plug a sinking ship. "Clara was just an escape. It wasn't about her, it was about me. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to get caught," Linda corrected coldly. "You would have kept lying until the baby was born, until our lives were too entangled for me to leave." He flinched but tried again. "We can fix this. Let's go to therapy. Let's talk to someone." "No," she said. Her voice was calm, final. "I've already spoken to someone. A lawyer. And I know about the infidelity clause in the prenup you made me sign. You remember that, right? The one you told me was just a formality?" The color drained from his face. "I'm leaving, Edward," she continued. "I've already moved most of my things to Diane's. I'm filing for divorce." He stood abruptly, eyes wild. "You can't just walk out on this. On me. On our child." "I'm not walking out on my child," she said, rising to meet him. "I'm protecting him from lies, from betrayal, from growing up watching his mother pretend everything was okay while his father lived a double life." Edward took a step closer. "You won't make it without me. Think about what you're giving up." "I already did," she said, "the moment I saw that email." She turned toward the hallway, her overnight bag already packed and ready near the door. Edward stood frozen, helpless in his own pristine penthouse, suddenly aware of how empty it felt without control. "I'll have my attorney reach out," she said without looking back. "Save your explanations for someone who doesn't know better." And with that, Linda walked out. Not in tears, not in fury, but in quiet, steady defiance. She had no illusions left, only the truth, and the life she was about to rebuild on her own terms. The days that followed unfolded with the surreal calm that often accompanies the aftermath of an earthquake. Everything looked intact on the surface, but beneath it all, fault lines shifted. Linda settled into Diane's guest room, a modest space with yellow curtains and books stacked high on every shelf. It wasn't luxury, it wasn't marble countertops and ocean view balconies, but it was quiet and safe. Each morning, she woke to the soft hum of city life outside the window and the weight of her growing belly, grounding her in a reality she could finally trust because she had built it herself. No lies, no double lives, just her and the baby. Claudia White, her divorce attorney, was efficient and precise. She took one look at the folder of evidence Linda had collected and nodded with approval. "You've got a rock-solid case," she said, tapping a French manicured finger against a photo of Edward and Clara in Santorini. "Prenup's clear. Infidelity clause. This will work in your favor, financially and legally." Linda listened, taking notes, trying to stay detached. But there were moments when she'd hear Edward's voice in her memory, the echo of promises he once whispered in the dark, or the warmth of his hand on her belly during their first ultrasound, when her resolve would flicker. Love didn't vanish overnight, but trust, once broken, had no resurrection. Edward, for his part, began a campaign of desperate normalcy. He sent texts, "Thinking of you. Hope you're sleeping okay. Let me know if you need anything." He even showed up unannounced at Diane's doorstep once, bearing a bag of organic snacks and prenatal vitamins, pretending he didn't see the cold steel in Linda's eyes as she refused to open the door. She didn't respond to his messages. She gave him no reaction. The silence was not revenge, it was clarity. The tabloids caught wind of the divorce a week later. It started with a vague headline, "Tech investor's marriage cracks amid rumors of affair." Then came the photos. Leaked somehow from a source no one would name, images of Edward and Clara boarding a private jet. The gossip columns lit up. Linda ignored it all. She didn't need the world's sympathy. She needed peace. One morning, a package arrived at Diane's door. Inside was a small, handwritten note from Edward, scrawled in familiar, hurried strokes. "I made the biggest mistake of my life. Please let me fix this." Folded inside was a printed itinerary. A single ticket to a wellness retreat in Napa, one of the places they used to dream about when they first got married. A peace offering, a plea. Linda tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. Instead, she kept walking forward. Each step became easier. She rented a small cottage just outside the city, a 2-bedroom space with ivy creeping up the brick exterior and a porch swing that creaked when the wind passed through. Diane helped her move in, box by box, humming old 70s tunes while Linda arranged baby clothes in the nursery. There was a warmth to the place that no penthouse ever had. It smelled like wood polish and fresh paint. Like beginnings. The birth came on a crisp autumn evening. The leaves had turned copper and gold, and the air carried that unmistakable promise of change. Diane drove her to the hospital, her hand gripping Linda's through every contraction, never once letting go. After hours of labor, exhaustion, and silent prayers whispered through clenched teeth, Linda heard the first cry. Her baby arrived wailing, red-faced and beautiful. The nurse laid him on her chest, and in that instant, everything shifted. It wasn't pain she remembered. Not betrayal, not Edward's lies. It was this tiny life, warm and trembling against her skin, anchoring her to a truth that nothing could touch. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she kissed the crown of his head. "We made it," she whispered. "You and me." She named him Elliot. Not after anyone, not to honor the past, but because it sounded strong and new and whole. Weeks later, as she rocked Elliot on the porch of their cottage, Linda found herself smiling. Not because life was perfect, but because it was hers. She'd reclaimed it piece by piece. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had carved space for something else to grow. Resilience, peace, hope. A letter came in the mail one afternoon, Edward's handwriting again. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She already knew what it would say. Instead, she tucked Elliot closer, humming softly as he dozed in her arms, the afternoon sun wrapping them in golden light. She didn't need closure. She had a new beginning. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this emotional journey. If you're still here, it means you care about stories that reflect real-life strength, heartbreak, and ultimately, hope. This story reminds us that sometimes the most devastating betrayals reveal the truth we need to face in order to reclaim our lives. Linda's strength wasn't in never falling. It was in rising after being broken. She chose truth over illusion, courage over comfort, and love for her child over fear of the unknown. Life will test us. People will fail us. But we always have the power to choose how we respond. And sometimes, walking away isn't weakness. It's the beginning of healing. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. It's amazing to see how stories connect us across the world. If this touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share real, powerful stories every week. Stories that matter, stories that stay with you. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and never be afraid to start over. A pregnant wife is pushed off a balcony at her husband's lavish party, but the truth behind her fall is darker than anyone imagined. Lies, obsession, and betrayal unravel as a powerful woman rises from the ashes to expose those who tried to erase her. You won't believe how it ends. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another unforgettable story like this. The Whitmore estate was glowing that night. Golden lights strung from the treetops, laughter echoing against the marble pillars, and champagne flowing like water. Grant Whitmore, the 38-year-old real estate mogul, was celebrating his birthday with the kind of opulence that only money could buy. Celebrities mingled with politicians, business elites danced under fairy lights, and the string quartet played a melody so delicate it barely stirred the evening air. But amid all the elegance, Evelyn stood apart. At 34 and 8 months pregnant, she moved slowly but gracefully, wrapped in a silver gown that shimmered like moonlight. Her smile was soft, but her eyes were distant, searching. She leaned lightly on the balcony railing, her hands resting protectively on her rounded belly. From afar, she looked every bit the radiant wife of a powerful man. But up close, something was wrong. She wasn't enjoying the evening. She hadn't been for weeks. Grant had noticed the shift, her silence, the way she avoided his touch, how her eyes never lingered on him anymore. But tonight, surrounded by hundreds of guests and flashing cameras, he pretended everything was perfect, that Evelyn wasn't pulling away, that the coldness between them wasn't growing wider by the day. Jolene moved like fire through the crowd. She was sharp, poised, dressed in a deep crimson gown that clung to her curves and caught the eye of every man in the room. She had only been Grant's executive assistant a year ago. Now she seemed to own every room she entered. Guests whispered about her, some admiring, some wary, but no one could deny her power. She had become essential to Grant's life, and some feared, perhaps to his heart. Evelyn saw it too. She'd felt it for months. Jolene's presence had gone from helpful to hovering, then to haunting. The way she stood too close to Grant. The late-night calls, the inside jokes. Evelyn wasn't a fool. But what haunted her more wasn't the betrayal she suspected. It was the feeling that something far more dangerous was lurking behind Jolene's perfectly painted smile. The party was reaching its crescendo when it happened. It began with a scream, not the excited squeal of a guest or the joyful shout of celebration. It was sharp, raw, primal, like glass shattering in the cold night air. For a second, time stopped. Conversations froze. Glasses slipped from fingers. The music faltered, and then Evelyn flew. She was seen only for a second, her body twisting in midair, arms flailing, her silver gown catching the wind like broken wings. Her scream cut through the air as her body plummeted 3 stories down into the marble courtyard. The impact was sickening, a dull, final thud that silenced the world. Gasps turned to shrieks. Guests rushed toward the railing. Some screamed, others dropped to their knees. And at the center of it all, Grant stood motionless, his champagne flute falling from his hand, shattering at his feet. Below, Evelyn lay broken. Blood pooled beneath her. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, then fell shut. Her lips moved like she was trying to say something, but nothing came out. Her silver dress was torn, her hands limp, her belly still. And then came the cries. "She's pregnant," someone shouted. "Call 911." People scrambled for phones. Waitstaff screamed for help. Medics rushed forward. But Grant didn't move. He stared at his wife, the mother of his child, dying before his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. All the money in the world couldn't rewind the last few seconds. Then the murmurs began, slowly like a tide creeping in. She was with her. I saw them talking up there. No way, was it Jolene? Every head turned to the balcony. Jolene was standing there, alone, her red dress framed against the white stone. She didn't cry, didn't scream, she didn't even blink. Her hands rested on the railing where Evelyn had stood moments ago. Her face was a mask, blank, unreadable, ice cold. Her gaze locked onto Evelyn's body below as if watching the final act of a play she had written. Around her, silence fell, a silence louder than any scream. Grant looked up, their eyes met, his filled with rage, hers with nothing at all. And in that moment, without a word spoken, something inside Grant broke. Grant barely slept for days after the fall. He sat alone in the hospital waiting room, eyes bloodshot, clothes wrinkled, replaying the moment over and over. Evelyn was still in a coma. Their unborn son was alive, miraculously, but hanging on by a thread. The doctors didn't sugarcoat it. It could go either way, one had said, and that uncertainty gnawed at Grant like a slow, steady fire. He had told the police what little he knew, told them Evelyn fell, maybe slipped, that no one saw what happened, that the security cameras had glitched, that Jolene was nearby, but they didn't press further. Wealth had its way of silencing urgency, but Grant couldn't silence himself. One sleepless night, he opened a file drawer in his study and pulled out a business card. Max Lennox, private investigator. They'd met at a charity auction 2 years ago. Max was old school, former FBI, with a voice like gravel and a stare that made liars squirm. Grant called him that night. No pleasantries, just 4 words: I need the truth. What Max uncovered over the next week shattered Grant's already splintered world. Jolene had no past, or rather, too many. Her resume, fabricated. Her references, non-existent. The name Jolene Carter had only been in circulation for a little over 4 years. Before that, she had gone by at least 2 other identities. One was flagged in a fraud investigation in Louisiana. Another linked to a dissolved company in Belize that had funneled money through offshore accounts. The deeper Max dug, the darker it got, and then he found something personal. Something that punched Grant straight in the chest. A photo. 2 women in their early 20s, arms around each other, smiles wide and unsuspecting. Evelyn and Jolene. Not co-workers, not strangers. Roommates. Friends. Years ago. Max laid the picture on the table like it was Exhibit A in a murder trial. Grant stared at it in disbelief. They knew each other, he asked, barely able to breathe. They were close, Max replied, until something went very wrong. He wasn't wrong. Buried in a string of deleted emails Max managed to recover, the story unfolded. Back in college, Jolene, then going by Melissa Crane, had been engaged, promising law student bright future, but it fell apart after her fiancé fell for Evelyn. It wasn't scandalous, just heartbreak. Evelyn hadn't even known Jolene had feelings for him. But Jolene knew, and she never forgot. It wasn't just a love lost, it was a wound, one that festered, one she wrapped in silk and vengeance, one she carried with her into Grant's life like a Trojan horse. Everything began to make sense. The late nights, the perfect timing, the charm that seemed too convenient. Jolene hadn't fallen in love with Grant. She'd orchestrated her entrance into his life like a chess master maneuvering toward checkmate, slowly, precisely, ruthlessly. And Evelyn? She hadn't stood a chance. There were videos, surveillance from the office, that showed Jolene copying Evelyn's voice, her walk, even the way she sipped coffee. Grant watched, heart sinking, as Jolene practiced smiling into a mirror the same way Evelyn did. She had studied her, shadowed her, eclipsed her. But the most chilling discovery wasn't digital. It was a file left in Grant's own home office, tucked inside a drawer Jolene once had access to. Inside was a draft of a forged psychological evaluation, dated 4 months before Evelyn's fall. The document claimed Evelyn suffered from severe prenatal psychosis and had accused Grant of infidelity and paranoia. The worst line read, "Patient has expressed uncertainty about the baby's paternity." It was designed to destroy her. Her credibility, her sanity, her motherhood. All of it. Weaponized. Grant's fingers trembled as he held the paper. He remembered Jolene's concerned tone just a month ago. "I think Evelyn's under too much stress. Maybe get her help before something happens." He had brushed it off, dismissed it as harmless worry. Now he saw it for what it was, an alibi in the making. A narrative carefully seeded to make Evelyn's fall seem like the final chapter in a breakdown no one could prevent. Only now did he realize the truth. Jolene hadn't wanted him. She wanted Evelyn's life, her husband, her child, her legacy, and she'd nearly succeeded. Grant pressed his palms against the edge of his desk and closed his eyes, bile rising in his throat. Guilt wrapped around his throat like a noose. He hadn't just failed to see it, he had been complicit in it. Too trusting, too blind, too easily swayed by charm and desire. He opened his eyes and stared out the window, where the first gray light of morning was breaking. Everything he thought he knew had been a lie. And if Evelyn ever woke up, he didn't know how he would look her in the eye. Evelyn awoke in a haze of pale hospital lights and antiseptic silence. The world felt distant, muffled, like she was underwater. Her body was sore in places she couldn't name, and her mind floated between memory and dream. For a few moments, she lay still, staring at the cracks in the ceiling tiles, too afraid to move, too afraid to remember. Then it all came rushing back. The party, the railing, the red dress, the scream. Her heart jolted in her chest, and a monitor beeped in response. A nurse appeared almost immediately, gentle hands checking vitals, soft words of reassurance, but Evelyn's voice broke through the fog before the nurse could say more. She said she'd kill my baby. The nurse froze. What did you say, Mrs. Whitmore? Evelyn's voice was weak but urgent. Jolene. She said if I didn't leave Grant, she'd kill him. The baby. Her breath trembled. She grabbed me. I remember her hand. Cold, so tight. And then, nothing. The nurse didn't ask more questions. She just pressed the emergency call button behind her and whispered, I believe you. What Evelyn didn't know was that this particular nurse had seen enough rich men's scandals to know when a woman was telling the truth, and this time, she made sure someone else heard it too. She left her phone recording on the edge of the sink, just in case. Meanwhile, Grant sat in the hallway outside, elbows on his knees, head bowed like a man on trial. When the nurse finally emerged and told him Evelyn was awake, he felt both a flood of relief and a surge of panic. He stood, but his legs barely held. What was he supposed to say? That he was sorry? That she had been right? That he'd let a viper into their home and into their marriage? He entered the room slowly. Evelyn turned her head. Her face was pale, her lips dry, but her eyes, those green eyes he had once fallen in love with, were sharp. You're awake, he breathed, tears threatening. Thank God. But Evelyn didn't smile. She didn't reach for him. She just stared. Where is she? She asked. Is she still in our house? The word "our" hit him like a brick. No, he said quickly. She's not. I had her removed days ago. I didn't know what she was capable of. Evelyn didn't respond. Her silence filled the room like smoke. Grant pulled a chair closer. Eve, I need to tell you something. You weren't wrong about any of it. I've had her investigated. She isn't who she said she was, not even close. Evelyn closed her eyes, fighting tears. You didn't believe me. He swallowed. I know, and I hate myself for it, but I know now. I know everything. He told her what Max had found, the aliases, the financial trails, the surveillance footage of Jolene copying Evelyn's mannerisms. He didn't spare her the details. She deserved to know the full extent of the betrayal, the forged psych report, the lies, the slow poisoning of her identity. By the time he finished, Evelyn was staring at the wall, jaw clenched. Her voice was hollow. She wanted to become me. Yes, Grant whispered, and I let her get close enough to almost do it. Evelyn didn't cry. Her eyes stayed dry, her gaze hard. You slept with her. He couldn't answer. I can see it on your face, she said. And you know what the worst part is, Grant? I don't even care about that anymore. You betrayed me the moment you believed her over me. I didn't know what to believe, he said, voice cracking. No, she replied coldly. You didn't want to believe me. That's the difference. The next day, an anonymous text arrived on Grant's phone. No words, just a video file. He opened it with shaking hands. The footage was grainy, shot from what looked like a hidden outdoor camera. But the timestamp placed it 2 days before the party. It showed Evelyn and Jolene on the same balcony. Evelyn was upset, gesturing frantically. Jolene stood a few feet away, calm, smug, arms crossed. The audio was faint, but Evelyn's voice trembled with fear. Then Jolene moved closer, too close, and grabbed Evelyn's wrist. Right before the screen went black. The footage had been cut. Someone had edited the end out, but what it showed was enough. Grant felt the heat rise in his chest, shame and fury colliding. He knew it now. This wasn't some tragic accident. This was a meticulously crafted act of violence, a performance, a coup. He showed the footage to Max, who began tracing the source immediately. Then he went back to the hospital. Evelyn was resting when he arrived, but her eyes opened the moment he stepped in. I have proof, he said. A video. She grabbed you. It cuts out before the fall, but it's enough to raise doubt. Enough to reopen an investigation. Evelyn didn't flinch. She meant to kill me. I know. She said it, Evelyn whispered. She looked me in the eyes and said, if I didn't walk away from you, I wouldn't walk away at all. Grant sat down, overwhelmed. We're going to bring her down, Eve. I swear it. Not just for you, for our son. Evelyn looked down at her stomach, her hand gently resting over the blanket. For the first time since the fall, she allowed herself a flicker of hope, but behind her hope was a storm. And Jolene had no idea it was coming. The grand ballroom of the Rosewell Hotel shimmered beneath the chandelier light, alive with glitz and pretense. The city's wealthiest elites moved through the room like ghosts in pearls and tailored suits, sipping imported wine, exchanging empty compliments, and smiling as if nothing in their lives had ever gone wrong. But for Grant Whitmore, the man standing quietly at the back in a black tux that felt more like armor than elegance, this night wasn't about appearances. It was a trap. For weeks, Grant had been planning this moment. He'd hired tech teams, legal consultants, and investigators. Every detail had been calculated, every second choreographed. This wasn't just a party, it was a reckoning. At the center of the ballroom stood Jolene, radiant as ever in a sapphire gown that sparkled like a lie. She laughed with a group of investors, her voice lilting with the same rehearsed charm that once disarmed him. She posed for photos, gave brief interviews, and basked in the glow of her illusion. To the world, she was still the poised, elegant woman behind Grant's empire, a phoenix risen from tragedy. But that illusion was about to burn. From the shadows near the catering station, Max Lennox gave Grant a slight nod. It was time. The lights dimmed, music faded, and a hush fell over the room. Guests turned, expecting a slideshow or a corporate announcement. Instead, a large screen lowered behind the main stage, and a single video began to play. There was no introduction. Just the unedited, unfiltered truth. The footage opened with Evelyn and Jolene on the balcony. Evelyn was visibly emotional, her hands gripping the railing, her voice cracking as she pleaded. Jolene, in a blood-red dress, stood too close, too still. The camera captured her reaching out, her hand seizing Evelyn's wrist, and then, black. The room gasped. A few hands covered mouths. Others leaned in, eyes wide. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Did she push her? That's Evelyn. My God. Is this real? The footage ended abruptly, but the damage had been done. Jolene's mask of composure shattered instantly. She stumbled back, her glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. Faces turned toward her. Phones rose to capture her reaction. Whispers turned to shouts. I told you I saw them together that night. She was with her. She was standing right there. Jolene's eyes darted around the room like a hunted animal. Her breath quickened. She backed toward the exit, heels clicking like gunshots on marble. But before she could slip away, a hand gripped her wrist. Grant. His face was stone, cold, controlled. You're not going anywhere, he said, his voice low, steady. She tried to yank free. You can't do this. You did this, he snapped. To her. To our child. Security approached, ready to intervene, but Grant raised a hand. I want to speak to her alone. The crowd hesitated. Then, reluctantly, the guard stepped back. The ballroom was silent again, thick with tension. Jolene turned to him, her voice desperate now but still laced with venom. I gave you everything, Grant. Everything. And this is how you repay me? You gave me nothing but lies, he said. You studied my wife, copied her, stole from us, tried to erase her. You almost succeeded. Her eyes narrowed. You're so blind? You think this is about you? About love? She laughed bitterly. I didn't want your heart, Grant. I wanted your destruction. And look around. You've lost everything. The only person who could have saved you is gone. Not gone, came a voice from the back of the room. Every head turned. Evelyn stood in the entranceway, dressed simply in a pale blue dress that swayed with every careful step she took. Her face was drawn but regal, her eyes blazing with a fire that silence couldn't kill. She walked slowly, deliberately, through the parting crowd like a storm cutting across still waters. Jolene froze. Evelyn stopped just a few feet away. She didn't look at Grant. Her eyes were locked on the woman who had nearly ended her life. You thought you could erase me, she said, her voice calm but sharp as glass. But you made me stronger. Jolene tried to speak, but Evelyn cut her off. You didn't want my husband. You wanted my identity, my joy, my child. You wanted to be me. But you'll never know what it means to be loved, not truly, not without lies. Jolene's lips curled. I'm not the only one who betrayed you. He let me in. He let me touch everything that was yours. Evelyn's eyes flicked to Grant for the first time. He looked broken, hollow. I know, she whispered, and I'll never forget it. The police entered a moment later, their presence unmistakable. Jolene tried to protest, but her words were drowned out by the clicks of cameras and the snap of handcuffs. As they led her away, she shouted, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." But no one answered her. Evelyn stood tall, unmoved, and Grant, he stood behind her, surrounded by the empire he once ruled, now reduced to gossip, scandal, and ruin. He had won the battle, yes, but the war had left scars that no fortune could hide. He looked at Evelyn, hoping for forgiveness, but all he saw in her eyes was the strength of a woman who had walked through fire and no longer needed to be saved. The days that followed were a blur of headlines, legal proceedings, and the slow, agonizing collapse of everything Grant Whitmore had built. Investors pulled out, lawsuits piled in, and the once pristine Whitmore name became synonymous with scandal. The board ousted him quietly, not out of malice, but survival. And in a matter of weeks, the man who had once been hailed as the city's golden tycoon became a cautionary tale, whispered across mahogany boardrooms and country club lounges. Brent, his cousin and lifelong business partner, was arrested at the border trying to flee with forged documents and a suitcase full of cash. His betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Grant had trusted him with everything: his company, his family, his future. And all along, Brent had been colluding with Jolene, helping her forge wills, plant false evidence, launder money. Jolene herself was sentenced to 15 years without the possibility of parole. Her courtroom appearance was haunting. No makeup, no designer dress, just a cold stare and a final, venomous glare at Evelyn as the verdict was read. But Evelyn didn't flinch. She sat still, chin high, fingers laced in her lap like a queen attending the fall of an impostor. And yet, despite the justice served, the damage was done. Evelyn declined Grant's offer to return to the mansion. She didn't want the golden cage, the tainted rooms, or the marble floors that still echoed with betrayal. But she did accept something else: control of the Whitmore Foundation. Not for wealth or prestige, but as a platform to rebuild something meaningful. She turned it into a sanctuary for women escaping manipulation, gaslighting, and violence. Her pain became purpose, and with every story she helped rewrite, she rewrote her own. 1 year passed. The leaves had turned amber and gold again when Grant opened the front door to find Evelyn standing on his porch, no longer in silk or silver, but in denim and soft linen. Her hair was tied back, her face calm. In her arms was a child, dark-haired, brown-eyed, with Evelyn's quiet strength already shining through his gaze. Grant's breath caught. "I thought you should meet your son," she said simply. His knees nearly gave out. She wasn't there to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she wasn't there to punish him either. This wasn't about the past. It was about a boy who had a right to know where he came from, and a man who had one last chance to prove he could be something more than the mess he'd made. The visits were awkward at first, tense, full of pauses and unfinished sentences, but Evelyn allowed them. She watched closely as Grant held the child, read to him, fed him with clumsy hands, and whispered apologies into his tiny ears, not for what he had done, but for what he almost cost him. She gave him no promises, no easy paths back. What had been broken could not be made whole, but cracks could be filled with time, with effort, with truth. And so, slowly, they began to coexist, not as husband and wife, not even as friends, but as two people tethered by something stronger than resentment, by responsibility, by love for the same child. One afternoon, Evelyn stood at the edge of a charity gala, not to be seen, not to take the stage, but to watch another survivor speak. A woman Evelyn had helped, whose story mirrored her own in haunting ways. As the audience applauded, Evelyn smiled. Not because she was back in the spotlight, but because she didn't need it anymore. She had freed herself. From Jolene, from Grant, from the expectations that once chained her to a role she no longer recognized. Now, she was the author of her own story. Later that week, she met Grant and their son at a quiet stretch of beach, far from the city's noise. The little boy ran toward the waves, laughter echoing in the wind. Grant and Evelyn walked behind him, not touching, not talking much, just existing in shared silence. No rings, no paparazzi, no lies, just the sound of the ocean and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, something whole could still rise from the ruin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, their son turned and called out for them, his little hands reaching for both. Evelyn bent down to pick him up, and Grant stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. They weren't what they had been, they might never be. But in that moment, under the fading light, They were something else entirely. Not broken, not lost, just human. And in the quiet strength of Evelyn's voice as she whispered to her son, and in the steadiness of Grant's hand brushing his hair, there was something real, something unshaken, something like peace. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this powerful story. If you're still here, it means you felt something, and maybe like us, you believe that stories like Evelyn's aren't just fiction. They're reflections of real strength, real pain, and real healing. What can we learn from this? That betrayal cuts deep, but truth has a way of rising. That healing takes time, but with courage we can rebuild not just our lives, but our purpose. And most importantly, that the strongest love isn't always romantic. Sometimes it's the love we fight to give our children and the peace we finally find within ourselves. We'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. Your presence here means the world to us. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, redemption, and real human emotion. We share new stories every week, crafted with care and meaning, just for you. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and take care.